Jean-Luc Picard, captain of the USS Enterprise D. He's an intellectual, a diplomat, a thespian, an archaeologist, an all-around Renaissance man. To me, he's one of the most fascinating fictional characters ever written. He's the lead character in a television series that explores both the farthest reaches of human imagination and the innermost depths of the human spirit. And in his role aboard the Enterprise, he's our leader, our moral compass, and our guide. So in this video, we're going to examine the character of Jean-Luc Picard and try to figure out exactly what it is that makes him so awesome. So let's get into it on The Art of Storytelling. I think if you had to pick one word to describe the subject of Star Trek: The Next Generation, it would be the same word that describes what makes Jean-Luc Picard a great character, and that word is humanity. On its surface, the show is about space exploration, but like all great science fiction, this premise is really just a framework for posing questions about human nature. Looking back at the original Star Trek series, it's easy to see why Gene Roddenberry wanted the captain of this new series to contrast the character of Captain Kirk, the impulsive man of action. Roddenberry wanted to explore an alternative vision of leadership that was more reflective and restrained. Whereas Kirk was something more like the swashbuckling space hero of pulp serials, Picard was more like C.S. Forrester's Horatio Hornblower, the stoic and ethically principled naval captain. If you've watched the first season of TNG, which aired in 1987, you'll know that the show was still very much finding its footing at this time. The writers hadn't yet figured out who the characters were, and the actors didn't yet know how to portray them. But already by the second season, they seemed to find themselves and settle into the characters we know and love today. This is especially true of Picard, who for the first season was a bit too rigid and formal to be relatable as a character, especially a lead character. One interesting thing is that Picard's character wasn't entirely conceived on paper. He emerged organically as a collaborative effort between writers, directors, and of course the actor who portrayed him, Patrick Stewart. He was a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company and was famously reluctant to even take the role, which he believed might harm his reputation as a serious stage actor. There was also a reluctance on the part of the producers, who feared that a bald Englishman wouldn't have the commanding presence they wanted for the character. They even toyed with the idea of a hairpiece. But in the end, cooler and balder heads prevailed, and by the second season, more and more people were discovering the show that would go on to become one of the most popular and critically successful TV shows of all time. Not only were Patrick Stewart's fears of debasing his career unfounded, his performance actually elevated the perception of television as a legitimate venue for serious acting. I think this story of the early development of the character gives us a great insight into why this character works so well, and that is that he developed slowly and organically, and crucially, his character was written by many people. TNG had kind of a unique writing process. The show had a core team of staff writers and showrunners, but it also actively sought out freelance writers, people who had no connection to the Star Trek franchise, other than being fans of the show who were interested in telling stories in that world. Picard is complex and multifaceted because he has multiple authors. Picard wasn't designed by a single author with a single intention, and I think that's why he doesn't feel contrived like so many other characters do. He really feels like a real person, and that is especially important for a character who is meant to represent humanity. And this organic development continues throughout the show's 7 seasons. The character who began as a stern and authoritarian captain is gradually revealed to be more vulnerable than expected. One of the earliest examples of this is in the episode called Where No One Has Gone Before. The Enterprise travels far beyond the galaxy into a region of space where thoughts manifest reality, and Picard has a vision of his mother inviting him to tea in one of the ship's corridors.
Mama, I'll make it good and strong, the way you like it. Mama.
It's an absolutely beautiful scene and was an early indication that this somewhat campy TV show had real potential to explore profound ideas. By season 2, the writers have really begun to realize the show's potential in exploring complex ethical questions, like the question of whether the artificially intelligent Data is conscious and therefore ought to have the rights of any other person. In The Measure of a Man, Picard delivers a stirring defense of Data that turns out rather to be an indictment of man's tendency to ascribe otherness to different races in order to justify their abuse or exploitation.
So what if he meets the third, consciousness in even the smallest degree? What is he then? I don't know. Do you? Do you?
There's a depth of wisdom in the speech that is surprising for a TV show, and it really expands Picard's character, kind of sets the stage for future episodes in the series to explore similar moral questions. What should you do if your commanding officer orders you to lie to him? Does a mandate of non-interference in the development of a civilization apply even in cases that would result in the total destruction of that civilization? If you're given a chance to undo the mistakes of your past, should you do it? Speaking of trials, the entire premise of the series is that humanity itself is on trial for their worthiness in having the power to travel and explore the universe. The judge in this case is Q, the trickster and provocateur written as a foil, a cynical counterpoint to Picard's earnest optimism. Q accuses humanity of being, quote, a savage child race, the precise opposite of Picard's view. The fact that Q is both omnipotent and deeply interested in Picard is one of the ways that Picard's character is deepened and complicated. Q appears to have contempt for Picard and by implication for humanity itself, but as always with Q, things are more than what they appear. His character is left intentionally mysterious and morally ambiguous. Again, the opposite of Picard's apparent moral conviction. And this brings me to one of the most important episodes in the story of Picard's character development, and that is, of course, Q Who.
We'll just have to see how ready you are.
Once again, the Enterprise is flung into an unexplored region of space, but this time because Q wants to give Jean-Luc a preview of the danger that awaits mankind in their exploration of the galaxy. The ship immediately encounters an alien race that is a hive mind of millions of biomechanical drones, the Borg.
On screen. Magnify.
Like any great villain, the Borg's motivations are in direct conflict with those of the story's protagonists. It's like the writers sat down and asked themselves, what would an alien race look and behave like if they represented the precise opposite of Captain Picard's values? Picard is a humanist who values, above all, the sovereign rights of the individual. The Borg is a collective consciousness that subsumes and assimilates the individual. Picard is a diplomat and believes that peace can be achieved through dialogue and mutual respect. The Borg are indiscriminately destructive and have no regard whatsoever for life, let alone political process. The Borg are compelling villains precisely to the degree that they test the character Jean-Luc Picard and the morality that he represents. Anyway, the episode culminates in Picard's admission that he needs Q's help to survive, which turns out to be Q's intent to disabuse Picard of his naive arrogance.
I need you!
The story of Picard's relationship with the Borg is explored in much greater depth in the two-part episode, The Best of Both Worlds. Aside from being one of the most thrilling episodes in the series, it's also one of the most consequential for Picard's character. He is captured and assimilated by the Borg, becoming Locutus, a bridge between the Borg and the Federation. His knowledge of Starfleet tactics and command structure is absorbed into the collective and used against the Federation in their invasion of Earth. And this is, in many ways, the most cruel infliction Captain Picard could ever suffer. It's a total perversion of his character. It's a fate worse than death for him. In betraying the Federation, he does the precise opposite of what his character represents. I was 7 years old when this episode came out in 1990, and I still remember the cliffhanger of wondering whether Picard would become the show's villain, which, as far as we knew, was a real possibility. But in the end, he's saved by the heroism and ingenuity of his crew, who exploit the inherent vulnerability of the Borg's distributed command structure. When Picard's connection to the Borg is finally severed, Troy asks him how he feels, and he replies,
Almost human.
the perfect answer for a character who represents humanity. But actually, I think the most interesting and memorable character moment in this episode is the very end. TV shows like this one almost always end on a conclusive note, with the story fully resolved and, the audience's palate cleansed for next week's adventure. But not this episode. Picard, now back in his ready room and ready to take a sip of his familiar Earl Grey tea, pauses as if some remnant of the Borg has suddenly triggered deep inside his mind. He looks out of his ready room window, the only time in the series that we get a close-up exterior shot looking into the Enterprise from space. This is so that the reflection of Earth can be made visible in the window along with Picard. It's a beautiful and haunting portrait of his fragile humanity. Now, I feel like moments like this one elevate the show into serious art. Great thought and care went into crafting this moment, and the writers took a real chance in ending the episode this way because they knew the story cannot end honestly without Picard being traumatized. And the very next episode elaborates on this aspect of his character, having the unique distinction of being the only episode to take place almost entirely on planet Earth, and telling the story of Captain Picard being challenged by his brother to emotionally confront his assimilation by the Borg.
They took everything I was.
Again, this is a portrayal of Captain Picard that would have been unthinkable in the first season, and this just shows you how much the character has developed in just a couple short years. There are a few more episodes in the series that expand Picard's character in a similar way. One interesting revelation is that he has a mechanical heart, having been stabbed in a bar fight with a Nausicaan when he was a Starfleet cadet. It's one of several times we see an alternative Picard, a life that he could have lived. There's a similar story mechanic in The Inner Light, when he lives an entire life in the span of 25 minutes. These episodes are so good that I feel like they deserve their own videos, so stay tuned for those. Suffice to say that each one of them adds a new dimension to Picard's character and radically changes how the audience perceives him, so that by the time we get to All Good Things, the show's series finale, we are primed for Picard's final act and the resolution of his character's 7-year arc. And unlike most primetime TV shows, TNG's final episode was not a bitter disappointment. In fact, it's a perfect send-off and one of the show's best episodes. It uses a classic TNG time-bending story device to show us 3 versions of Picard at different times in his life. We revisit the stiff and formal Picard of Season 1, and we get a glimpse of his future as a cantankerous old winemaker. Everything about this episode is an appropriate conclusion for his character. It's revealed that Picard himself is responsible for creating an anomaly which, paradoxically, is both the cause and the result of Picard's efforts to prevent it. And this anomaly prevents life on Earth from happening at all. It's kind of a dizzying illustration of the complex nature of the cosmos. Fittingly, Q is revealed to be testing Picard one last time, and in keeping with the show's first episode, we get Q's final judgment about humanity, which is actually left tantalizingly ambiguous. All of this would be good enough for Picard's character resolution, but once again, the real magic is in this show's smaller moments. The last scene has Picard kind of sheepishly asking if he can join the crew in their customary poker game. And I think the genius of this is that it's the first time you really notice that in all the times you've seen the crew playing poker, Picard has never been there. It was in front of you the whole time, but because the character was written so consistently, you never questioned it. Of course, Picard would never be at the poker games because he's their commanding officer, and it would be a breach of his own ethical protocols for him to transgress that boundary. But at last, Picard's journey as a human being leads him to the final realization that the exploration that he seeks is not only out there in the galaxy, but also in his relationships and in the everyday struggle of being human.
Not mapping stars and studying nebula, but charting the unknown possibilities of existence.
There's such elegance and unity of theme and purpose in this final scene that it deserves its reputation as being one of the best final TV episodes of all time. Now, of course, Picard's story doesn't end there. There are 4 feature films and the recent Picard TV series, but I don't feel that any of these have understood Picard's character in the same way that the writers of The Next Generation did. It's kind of ironic that Patrick Stewart and the folks at CBS seemed to understand the value of Picard as a character and saw the potential in developing a series that focused specifically on him, but failed to respect the creative process that brought the characters into being. I must say I agree with the general consensus that the Picard series squandered an opportunity with shallow writing. Probably the most egregious error in the series was that they actually killed Picard and then reanimated him as a cybernetic being for no reason at all. This, remember, for a character whose entire purpose is to represent humanity. I think we can all agree that we'll just pretend that didn't happen. The 3rd season of Picard, which has virtually no continuity with the first 2, at least recognized that Picard's character is inseparable from his relationships with the rest of the Enterprise crew. I've said many times on this channel that it's a common fallacy about characters that they can be kind of surgically extracted from the context in which they're written and still retain their meaning. At the end of the day, Picard in the show, Picard, doesn't really feel like Picard, and the reason is actually comically obvious if you think about it. What's a captain without his ship? Who is a captain without his crew? Without the rigid command structure of Starfleet, the system of ethics that give context to Picard's morality, what is there to test his character? It's kind of funny how much better the third season was once they righted this basic error, but even then it all felt slightly unnecessary, even rehashing the final poker game as if to say, let's pretend this whole series never happened. And that's fine with me because the legacy of Star Trek The Next Generation is a really beautiful one, and I still love rewatching this show. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that Captain Picard is a role model to me. If I'm ever faced with a difficult decision in my life, I genuinely wonder, what would he do? That is the mark of a good character, and that is why Captain Picard is awesome. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more videos. Check out my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel, and I'll see you on the next one.